As you experience life, you face problems, which give you stress, and the trajectory of your life is determined by how you answer to them. But unlike our ancestors long ago, our problems are reoccurring. Whether it's thanks to work, people, or literally just trying to make ends meet because you decided to still exist in this world. Dragged out in the day after day monotony of life, it ends up negatively spreading into everything that we do and the way that we live. Before you realize it, the tension smothers you, and until it ends, you don't realize till after just how much it was affecting you, until you're able to look back on it. If you're anything like me when it comes to getting stressed, you know that you overthink and overcomplicate your problems all the time, which only increases the feelings more. Especially with the dumb choices I made at the beginning of high school, I naturally became conditioned to having a terrible relationship with stress and the way that I handled it. And if you're watching this video, that might be you too. This led to me a year ago doing something about it and start to intentionally work on and learn what makes up stress and how we react to it. Now I'm a psychologist that's done over 20 different studies with over 10,000 participants in 20 different countries. Okay, I'm not gonna lie, that was some bullshit. But this breakdown that I've learned and the changes that you can make with it has set me up to almost trick my brain to better handle the process of dealing with stress into my regular life. Honestly, I've never felt better and in more control of my feelings. So every day we live according to our identity, the story we believe of ourselves based upon the interpretation of our experiences that have determined who we are and what our expectations of ourselves mean today. But just like we live according to our identity and the interpretation of our experiences, we mentally do the same with our emotions, made up of three parts to any feeling you've experienced. Parts that always happen and makes the process of what leads to what we feel. And these parts, they sound simple when you hear them, but it's not, because every single one of them I was getting wrong. It's normal if you overthink or stress to get these wrong, especially the second one. So the real question is, what is this equation and how can we edit these three parts of the equation to work in our favor? We can work on rewiring the process that our brain currently has. When we hear of interpretation, we think of the story we see, the context we experience. You know, it feels very obvious, like getting an injury, needing to get a work or school project done, losing your wallet. How are those not gonna cause you stress? Here's the thing, you might click off, it always will. As annoyingly obvious as that was, it's not about eliminating, it's about limiting. And in order to limit, it's those thoughts that come after those first real couple initial seconds of reacting and realizing something. And the factor that actually makes up our interpretations is the expectations that we've grown to have. The ones which we subconsciously inherit from others, our friends, people, ego, society, and the human instinct to focus on the negative, which a study actually showed that the average person needs 5.6 positive statements, so really 6, in order to contradict a single negative one. We tend to, especially when we're already kind of stressed out, we tend to place a lot of emphasis on our circumstances and the negative results that follow, which we let determine how we feel. There's a study mentioned in Cal Newport's book, Deep Work, which actually the researcher that he mentions goes through an insane canon event. Do they still say that? Winfred Gallagher was her name, and she was diagnosed with life-threatening cancer. She was facing death straight on. Most people would have lost their shit, but she was a bit of a nonfiction nerd. So she made a commitment to herself. Even though she'd be going through terrible chemo cancer treatments, she would stay committed to focusing on what was good in her life. Movies, walks, and a martini at 6:30. And she found that even while feeling terrible from cancer treatment, with all the stress and worries that you can expect that would bring, the hardest thing she's probably ever gone through, she found those times, looking back on them, quite pleasant actually. After looking into this more once she fully beat cancer, and she confirmed what she had done through decades of research later, which was that our brains construct our interpretation based upon what we focus on. So when you naturally focus on the negative circumstances like lack of money, the most recurring problems in your life every day, your brain's worldview is negative, so that's all it can do is give you the feeling from those. It's not like I'm telling you just completely ignore the negative problems, like they are important, but we must put more focus intent on the positives of the situation. In order to help fight against focusing on the negatives, I've personally found that the most useful way to avoid doing this is by just making the mental note of making the best out of every scenario and situation that you can. It's like the first thing I tell myself, honestly. It might sound a little overly Walt Disney, but what good comes out of thinking anything else? You know, looking back 1 year from today, 5 years from today, would you rather remember the limited time you have on this earth, stressed out, feeling anxious, worried, and more importantly, remembering the negatives and all the feelings that came with that? Or a life that you always saw, felt, and therefore did the best out out of everything that you could, because it's up to our direction of focus that leads to the feelings and interpretations that we therefore will have. You have to always pay more attention to the positives, even if there's not that many. A good way to practice this is literally just at the end of the day, I do this normally when I journal, is write 3 sentences, write down one thing that you're grateful for, one thing that you did well today, and one thing that you look forward to tomorrow. Doing this will lead you to building the habit of noticing the positives in your daily life and situations over time. So say that you're meeting some friends of a friend, so some people that you're not entirely familiar with, and they unknowingly, while talking to them because they don't know you yet, they start to shit on your favorite sport. Let's say football, for example. Oh, anyone that plays football is an automatic little. Automatically, that's maybe gonna make you a little pressed. Why though? Well, it's obvious why. It feels like they're coming at and attacking part of who you are. These kind of situations happen all the time also with the problems that cause us stress. Your boss or coworkers at work question your competence and decisions, like, why'd you do it this way? Why didn't you get that done? Finance problems. Everyone's favorite. You know, maybe you didn't imagine yourself struggling to make ends meet like you are now, knowing that the check you just got is going pretty much entirely towards just rent and bills. Other identification problems that our pride is commonly linked to that are usually hurt from comments, thoughts, and comparisons to others in the online content we watch and consume include family expectations, health and fitness, relationship judgments, both of friends and significant others, personal beliefs and values, and appearance or style. They're coming at who we are, and so the feelings that we get are causing stress because pride in who we are is the most vulnerable part of us. But this quote sums up perfectly what we're getting wrong. An emotion itself is powerless. What gives it power is your conscious or unconscious identification with it. The emotions we get from thoughts and ideas, the identification we have with it, specifically when it's much more conscious, can be controlled, especially when you realize how much of it is ego. It may sound a little simple-minded and not make any real sense, but we as humans in the first place don't make any sense. If we didn't make a real sense, then we wouldn't have all these stressful feelings and problems. The amount of identification to our pride of what we feel we identify with. It's about changing what makes sense to you, because the current sense is not the sense that you want. Make sense? Does that make sense? I don't know. Man, these are getting fucking cheesy. But looking outward from the third perspective at these to make it more objective, to emotionally detach is how to remove a lot of stress from these problems. Some questions to help see the problem logically are, is this problem truly a part of who I am, or is it just an external circumstance? Am I defining my self-worth based on the situation and expectations? Why? How would I view this problem if it were happening to a friend? So the other lesson that I learned is that humans have an innate sense of staying intellectually consistent, especially to their identity. However you're thinking and identify yourself as, you will act accordingly, especially subconsciously. I would often make the mistake of identifying with my feelings. The framing to the statements and the words that I tell myself when I feel what I feel, I would get completely wrong. We objectively identify as the emotions that we feel. I am stressed, I am worried. In these statements that we tell ourselves, we're completely immersing and identifying with the feelings that we feel. If you tell yourself you're stressed, what you're really saying is, I'm gonna be someone that is stressed, because you see yourself as that. So not only that, but then you'll act accordingly to someone being stressed. But no one can actually be stressed or be sad. You can only ever feel stressed or feel depressed or whatever emotion it might be. We forget the fact that emotions are just something that always comes and goes, that there's something that we experience. We in hand are giving our negative emotions much more identity, which therefore means we give it much more feeling and meaning. So recognize and pay attention to whatever you're feeling during those analysis moments in your head when you're thinking to yourself and also talking about how you're feeling with others. Make sure to add in, especially if it's some sort of negative feeling or emotion, that I am feeling depressed, I am feeling sad. In those times, especially when you're feeling those negative feelings, just know that they will come and go. It always passes at some point, even if it doesn't feel like it will. Out of all of these, this is probably the one that you think you have the least control over. And while it might be true in some sense, I would argue that you actually have the most control over this. You can't control how many days you have to show up to work, being exposed to the environment and things that lead to you feeling again what you felt before. I could go over the really simple ones, which you probably already do, of like silencing your notifications, especially after work, changing what you've been exposing yourself to content-wise. Those are obvious. But the hardest yet most important and controllable way that we put repetitions in our head is that we need to change the negative topics and situations that we bring up in our head and say in conversations. Because again, it sounds simple, but it's so easy to get this wrong, and especially with other people. The world is so negative out there, honestly. Humans are pretty hilarious sometimes because we'll do exactly what leads to our problems, not be able to see that, and then we'll do it on repeat. 2 years ago, before I got intentional about improving myself, I worked at a breakfast restaurant, And if any of you guys have worked in the restaurant industry or are currently working in it, you know, it's hard work. I work early in the morning on weekends, and just over time, although it was a great place full of great people, I started to grow to not really love work. So I would complain about it with my friends every time it naturally came up, which it would come up pretty often actually, because trying to make plans over the weekend, it would ruin them. And so lo and behold, I had even worse feelings towards it gradually over time, the more that I talked about it. You know, if you count every time that you hang out with a friend and, you know, probably at least once you talk about how, you know, you aren't exactly loving work, spanned over, especially over months, that's a lot of times, which of course made showing up only harder, which made me only more miserable. As I then started to learn about self-improvement a year ago, I decided to shut up all the negative topics and conversations in my life. 2 weeks later, I realized just how much less resistance it took to wake up and show up to work. It made me feel probably, I would estimate, 3 times more likely to go into work. Never, I mean, I won't lie, I always showed up to work because I'm a good citizen. You could. Honestly, I started to truly enjoy working there again, and then the place burned down and I had to get a new job. But anyways, complaining, viewing, and talking about negative things in your head and in conversations can only add more of the feelings that you don't want into the mix of what you feel. Again, this is all about your brain perspective and worldview that you are constructing. It may sound a little overly simple, but it's so easy to not recognize of what we're putting repetitions of into our head if you're not intentional about it. I don't mean to never talk about and vent about the bad things that happen to you and in your life, but be mindful of how many times you're doing it, because those thoughts and feelings, when you do, will subtly always follow after. Most of the time too, nothing good comes from it. In order to feel how you want to feel, you must be specific about your inputs and how often. Everything, everyone, and every thought that you have that you allow yourself to be around, because the right inputs lead to the right outputs. No matter how much your brain will convince you, running through thoughts and scenarios of the future, especially consistently, isn't helping the future. We just do it to make ourselves think and feel like we're doing what we need to do instead of actually doing what we need to do about it. The habits you hear all the time that help you better handle stress, like going to the gym, meditating, reading, we can also run whatever's good for us, and as well as the feelings we feel, and doing the exact opposite of what we've done now to stress. Because again, this equation allows you to understand and guide your focus towards the right things, which is the key to ignoring and avoiding the stressful feelings. So really the whole point of this video is to make you flip what you do now with the negatives and the positives. I just also want to say the way that you're going to handle your stress is not going to change overnight. Restructuring our mental habits and feelings will take time, because you're changing and growing your mental and feelings comfort zone. Understand that you won't feel used to it until you've repeated it and done it so many times. The most important part, if you were to focus on any one thing from this video, and the biggest takeaway I would say, is the identity you have to reacting to stress. Objectively seeing and recognizing the changes to be able to handle stress differently, and understanding that the more that you do it, the sooner and easier it'll be to becoming a mental habit and thought process. And adding these to your identity will allow you to build the foundation of a life that you can live with less stress. I hope this video genuinely helps you feel less stressed, or helps you to get to that point. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please give it a like and consider subscribing. All the money that I make from this channel, if I even make any, and the money I'm saving from my work, will go towards a nicer camera, so definitely look forward to that. Have a beautiful rest of your day, and I'll see you soon.